Elder Scrolls lore has become a recent obsession of mine, and I find myself constantly trying to learn new things and become more knowledgeable about the universe I've loved since I was a kid. With the new Oblivion remake possibly launching soon, and the Elder Scrolls 6 on the horizon, hopefully, I wanted to get into making lore content for the Elder Scrolls so I can be as well versed as possible going into this new era for the franchise. Today we're going to start with the most evil and vile of the Daedric princes, Molag Bal. We will be going through his entire known history through the Elder Scrolls timeline, from the Dawn era all the way to the 4th era where we see Molag Bal in Skyrim. Let's get started. Molag Bal is one of the 17 Daedric princes, divine entities who exist in the planes of Oblivion and embody fundamental aspects of existence, often in dark and twisted forms. Unlike the Aedra, who sacrificed parts of their divine essence to create Mundus, the Daedra were never part of creation. They exist outside the physical world and exert their influence through worship, artifacts, and direct interaction with mortals. Among the Daedric princes, Molag Bal is one of the most malevolent. His primary sphere of influence is domination and enslavement, and he is often referred to as multiple names. The Harvester of Souls is one of them because he corrupts and enslaves mortals, stripping them of free will. The Lord of Domination, as he seeks to subjugate all of Nirn under his control, among a few other titles. Molag Bal's influence is not subtle like that of Mephala or Boethia, who deal in secrets and deception. Instead, he rules through fear, pain, and absolute control. He desires obedience, suffering, and the complete submission from mortals. He does not tempt, he takes. Like all Daedric princes, Molag Bal rules over his own Oblivion realm, called Coldharbour. This is one of the most nightmarish planes in existence, a bleak and twisted mockery of Nirn. Descriptions of Coldharbour paint it as a place of burning, with a blackened sky and a world cast in perpetual twilight. Ruined cities that mirror those from Nirn, desecrated and lifeless. Oceans of sludge and rivers of blood, reflecting his corruption. Mortals wandering in torment, their spirits broken and their bodies mutilated. Coldharbour is not a place of seduction or pleasure, it is a realm of absolute suffering. Those who enter rarely leave, and if they do, they're forever changed, broken in spirit. Molag Bal does not have true allies among the Daedra, as all princes are inherently selfish, but he does have rivals and the occasional partner. With Mehrunes Dagon, while both enjoy destruction, Dagon seeks chaotic annihilation, whereas Molag Bal craves dominion over what remains. With Boethia and Mephala, who are considered the good Daedra of the Dunmer, hate Molag Bal. He represents enslavement and stagnation, while they embody rebellion and change. With Clavicus Vile, although he's not an ally, Vile has a more transactional relationship with Molag Bal, sometimes dealing in the souls that he harvests. His most famous true rival, though, is Meridia. Meridia despises him for his corruption of life, and particularly his creation of vampires who feed on the living. Unlike princes like Sanguine or Sheogorath, who interact with immortals for amusement, Molag Bal sees them as tools, slaves, and prey. He corrupts through things like vampirism, which is his gift to mortals, making them predators upon their own kind. Things like soul trapping, with many souls taken by necromancers or dark mages end up in Coldharbour, suffering for eternity. And sometimes even direct possession and torture. He personally torments some of his followers, demanding absolute loyalty and cruelty. Worshippers of Molag Bal are often sadists, slavers, and tyrants, believing that power is the only truth. Molag Bal's nature makes him one of the most persistent threats to Nirn. Unlike princes who influence through trickery or manipulation, Molag Bal is a conqueror. He has attempted to enslave Nirn outright, most notably during the Plane Meld in the 2nd era, which you get to experience if you play the Elder Scrolls Online. His creation of vampirism alone ensures his ongoing influence, as he's directly tainted Nirn with his power. Even when he's not acting openly, his followers, cults, and vampires spread his will. Now we will go through each era and discuss what Molag Bal did in those eras, the influence he had, and all of the above. So the first era is the Dawn era. The Dawn era is the time before recorded history, before the stabilization of time itself. It's a mythic period in Elder Scrolls lore, filled with contradictory accounts, metaphysical events, and godly conflicts. This era saw the birth of existence, the war between the Aedra and the Daedra, and the foundation of many of the cosmic principles that still shape Nirn. During this time, Molag Bal first emerged as a force of corruption, domination, and entropy. Unlike some Daedric princes who remained distant in the early eras, Molag Bal actively opposed creation, attempting to warp Nirn from its very inception. In the pre-Mundus period before Nirn was fully formed, the Aedra and the Daedra took sides in the debate over Lorkhan's plan, which was the creation of the mortal world. The Aedra gave part of themselves in sacrifice to bring Nirn into existence. The Daedra, including Molag Bal, refused to contribute, seeing it as a trap and a weakening of their power. Some Daedra, like Boethia and Mephala, took an indirect interest in shaping Nirn's mortal inhabitants. Molag Bal, however, sought to destroy or enslave Nirn outright. This attitude set him apart from many of his peers. While Mehrunes Dagon wanted to reduce everything to ruin, Molag Bal's goal was more insidious, and that was to make existence submit to him. According to certain myths, Molag Bal attempted to stop the stabilization of Nirn, interfering with the El-Nofey, the proto-mortal spirits, who would later become the races of Tamriel. One legend suggests that Molag Bal sought to corrupt the early El-Nofey, turning them into mindless thralls before the world had even solidified. His corruption was done by Ariel, also known as Akatosh, who imposed linear time, forcing Molag Bal's influence into the background, at least temporarily. This early defeat is one of the many reasons that Molag Bal despises Akatosh, as the dragon god of time prevented him from ruling over mortals at the very dawn of existence. Molag Bal's hatred for order and time itself is reflected in his later actions, especially his desire to merge Nirn with his Oblivion realm, Coldharbour, erasing the stability imposed by the Aedra. One of Molag Bal's earliest and most enduring legacies is his role in creating vampirism. There is multiple versions of this event, but in this mythic era of the Dawn, it is said that Molag Bal assaulted a Nidic woman named Lemay Biolfag, one of the first humans. After this violent act, he left her to die, but instead of perishing, she rose as the first vampire, known as Lemay Bal, or the Blood Matron. She was reborn as something twisted, cursed to feed on the blood of the living, making her the progenitor of vampirism in Nirn. This event marked the first major intrusion of Molag Bal's corruption into mortal life, as the vampiric curse spread through Nirn. This story is particularly important because it establishes Molag Bal's power over life and undeath, and it highlights his brutality, that this vampirism was not a gift but a curse born of violence. It solidifies him as a direct enemy of Meridia as well, who despises undead creatures and actively works against vampirism. Some myths even claim that Molag Bal intentionally created vampires as a way to undo Arkay's cycle of life and death, ensuring that some mortals would never truly die, but also never truly live. Molag Bal's hatred of Nirn naturally put him at odds with Lorkhan, the god who tricked the Aedra into creating the mortal world. However, his relationship with Lorkhan is complicated. Some accounts suggest that Molag Bal mocked Lorkhan, seeing his creation of the mortal realm as a grand mistake that would ultimately lead to mortals suffering and becoming his slaves anyway. Others imply that Molag Bal saw Lorkhan as a rival, someone who wanted to reshape existence in his own way, much like Molag Bal himself. Regardless, Molag Bal's actions throughout history often involve undoing Lorkhan's creation, whether through vampirism, soul enslavement, or attempts to merge Nirn with Coldharbour. As time stabilized and the Dawn era transitioned into the Merethic era, Molag Bal's direct influence on the formation of Nirn waned a bit. However, his legacies, such as vampirism and his desire to dominate Nirn, remained and shaped events for thousands of years. With the stabilization of Nirn, Molag Bal could no longer openly alter reality, but he shifted his focus to subjugating mortals, using his power to ensnare worshippers, spread his influence, and create avatars of his will. Now we move from the Dawn era into the Merethic era. The Merethic era marks the beginning of recorded history, as time solidifies and civilizations rise. It is during this time that Molag Bal shifted his tactics, moving from outright interference in creation to more insidious forms of control. His influence spreads through the early Daedric worship, the spread of vampirism, and his first attempts to establish Nirn as an extension of Coldharbour. As the first mortal civilizations began to form, so did the worship of Daedric princes. While some races turned to the Aedra, such as the early Aldmeri reverence of Ariel and Magnus, others embraced the Daedra, seeing them as powerful patrons rather than distant gods. Molag Bal was particularly worshipped by a certain Chimer clans, primitive Nidic tribes, and the early vampires. Among the Chimer, Molag Bal was viewed as a dark god of domination and power. Some early Chimer clans turned to him for strength, a practice that was later suppressed by the tribunal when they established their dominance over Morrowind. Among the Needs, which are the Proto-Nords and Imperials, Molag Bal was feared rather than worshipped. His cults existed, but they were often seen as monstrous, existing on the fringes of society, practicing ritual sacrifices and acts of debasement in his name. Among early vampires, Molag Bal was revered as their progenitor. Many formed hidden cabals dedicated to spreading the vampiric curse, ensuring that his influence grew in the shadows of mortal civilization. These cults would persist for thousands of years, often appearing in isolated villages, underground temples, and later in noble houses where the vampire elite ruled from the shadows. During the Merethic era, Molag Bal perfected the process of soul enslavement, which would later become his most feared power. He began actively seizing mortal souls, bringing them to Coldharbour, which is his twisted realm of oblivion. Unlike some Daedric princes who made deals with mortals, Molag Bal did not bargain, he took. Those who died in his service, or were sacrificed to him, were dragged into Coldharbour and turned into eternal slaves. Coldharbour itself was designed as a mockery of Nirn, a twisted, decayed version of Tamriel, where mortals suffered without end, forever serving in Molag Bal's army. It is believed that some of the first mortal souls stolen by Molag Bal in this era remain in Coldharbour to this day, their identities long forgotten, existing only as tormented echoes of their former self. As Molag Bal's influence spread, so did the vampiric curse. Some vampires formed secret dynasties, ruling from the shadows. Others existed as lone predators, preying on isolated villages and passing travelers. The bloodlines of vampirism began to diverge, leading to the creation of different vampire clans, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Among these, the Volkihar clan, which we would later see in Skyrim, claims descent from Molag Bal himself, believing they are his favored children. While many saw vampirism as a curse, some early rulers embraced it, using their unnatural lifespans and enhanced abilities to amass wealth, knowledge, and influence. One of Molag Bal's greatest ambitions has always been to merge Nirn with his own realm of Coldharbour. The Merethic era saw his first recorded attempts to accomplish this goal. Rituals conducted by his mortal worshippers sought to open portals between Nirn and Coldharbour, but these efforts were largely incomplete. Some texts suggest that Molag Bal attempted to create a physical anchor between the two realms, but was stopped by the combined efforts of Ayleid sorcerers and the early Nedic priests. These early failures led him to redefine his methods, developing the dark anchors that he would use in later eras, such as in the events of the Elder Scrolls Online. While Molag Bal did not succeed in the Merethic era, his experiments laid the groundwork for future soul-snaring rituals, world-rending magic, and large-scale incursions into Nirn. Despite his growing influence, Molag Bal was not unopposed. Several groups actively worked against him, some of whom would become legendary enemies of his cults. The Ayleids, which were the early elven sorcerer kings and a powerful race of magic-wielding elves, had a complex relationship with the Daedra. Some Ayleid rulers were devoted to Molag Bal and his dark arts, practicing ritual sacrifices and soul enslavement. However, other Ayleids opposed him, worshipping Meridia, Magnus, and other Daedric spirits. This division among the Ayleids set the stage for the future conflicts, as some became dark sorcerers while others fought against Daedric corruption. Next were the early Nedic priesthoods. Among the early Nedic peoples, some formed priesthoods dedicated to Arkay and Ariel, opposing Molag Bal's corruption. These priests developed some of the first anti-vampiric rituals, many of which would later evolve into the orders of vampire hunters seen in later eras. And then there's the cult of Meridia. One of Molag Bal's greatest enemies, Meridia, began directly opposing his influence during the Merethic era. Some myths state that Meridia sent champions and divine warriors to purge his worshippers and destroy his vampire cults. This rivalry would last for all of history, as Meridia sees Molag Bal as a filthy, corrupting force that must be eradicated. By the end of the Merethic era, Molag Bal had established himself as one of the most feared Daedric princes. His cults, while not widespread, were deeply entrenched in certain societies. Vampirism had spread, becoming a dark secret of many noble houses and isolated clans. His early attempts to merge Nirn with Coldharbour failed, but the knowledge gained would allow him to refine his methods for future attempts. And as the First Era began, Molag Bal's focus shifted towards manipulating rulers, expanding his vampire legions, and continuing his long-term plan to drag Nirn into his dominion. Now we move into the First Era. With the dawn of the First Era, Molag Bal's influence expanded as mortal civilizations became more structured and powerful rulers began forging the first great empires. This era saw the rise and fall of the Aelids, the spread of vampirism across Tamriel, and Molag Bal's continued attempts to enslave mortal souls. While he operated largely from the shadows, his influence left lasting scars on Nirn, shaping cults, conflicts, and dark conspiracies that would persist for centuries. One of the earliest and most significant events of the First Era was the downfall of the Aelid Empire. This powerful civilization of elven sorcerer kings who ruled over Cyrodiil had long been divided between those who worshipped the Aedra and those who followed the Daedra. Many Aelid rulers were devoted to the Daedra, including Molag Bal. These Daedrophile Aelids practiced dark magic, soul enslavement, and human sacrifice, particularly targeting the enslaved Nedic humans of Cyrodiil. Some of these rulers, such as King Anumeril of Abigarlis, were directly aligned with Molag Bal, using sacrificial rituals to send human souls to Coldharbour. The Aelids' rule was brutal, and their human slaves rebelled against them, leading to the fall of the White Gold Tower and the rise of Alicia's empire. The Alician Rebellion, led by Saint Alicia and supported by the great warrior Pulinal Whitestrake, resulted in the destruction of many Daedric shrines and the slaughter of Aelid rulers who had aligned with Molag Bal. One of the most notorious of these was Abigarlis, a city completely devoted to Molag Bal. According to legend, this city was destroyed by Meridia herself, wiping out thousands of Molag Bal's worshippers. Despite the fall of the Aelid Empire, Molag Bal's influence persisted in hidden sects. His mortal worshippers fled underground, forming secretive cults that would resurface in later centuries. With the fall of the Aelids, Molag Bal's influence shifted towards another enduring legacy: vampirism. While vampires had existed since the Merethic era, the First Era saw their numbers grow significantly. Vampire lords and noble houses began to emerge, particularly in High Rock, Skyrim, and Cyrodiil. Some rulers even secretly aligned with vampires, believing their power could grant them immortality and strength. Among the most infamous of these vampiric bloodlines was the Volkihar clan, which claimed direct descent from Molag Bal himself. They feasted on human blood, lived in the frozen caves of Skyrim, and could transform into monstrous bat-like creatures. Harkon Volkihar, the most well-known vampire lord in later centuries, would come to believe himself to be Molag Bal's chosen. In High Rock, the Darini hegemony, an elven ruling class, was rumored to have secret alliances with the vampires. Some Darini nobles allegedly received Molag Bal's gift, using their vampiric nature to extend their lifespans and rule with supernatural power. When the Darini were eventually driven out of power, some of these vampires retreated into isolated castles, forming secret cabals that would persist for centuries. As the First Era progressed, Molag Bal made several attempts to breach Nirn and bring it under his dominion. His methods became more refined, focusing on soul snaring, Daedric incursions, and the creation of dark anchors, which were precursors to the world-rending magic he would use in the Second Era. While the full-scale plane meld, which is an event in the Elder Scrolls Online, would not occur until the Second Era, the First Era saw smaller-scale incursions. Some historical accounts mention localized tears in reality, where Coldharbour briefly overlapped with Nirn due to Molag Bal's rituals. These incidents were often linked to sacrificial cults who sought to open gateways to Coldharbour in exchange for power. While none of these attempts succeeded in permanently merging Nirn with Coldharbour, they set the stage for the more aggressive invasions in later centuries. The First Era also saw the rise of the Alessian Order, a religious movement that sought to eradicate Daedric influence from Tamriel. They destroyed Daedric shrines, outlawed Daedra worship, and persecuted Molag Bal's cults. Many of Molag Bal's followers were forced into hiding, operating in secret until the Order's eventual decline in the First Era. As the Alessian Order weakened, Molag Bal's cults began to resurface, particularly in regions where Daedric worship was still strong, such as Morrowind and hidden corners of Cyrodiil. By the end of the First Era, Molag Bal had established several long-lasting influences on Tamriel. Vampirism had spread widely, with powerful vampire lords ruling from the shadows. His cults, though suppressed, remained active in secret, waiting for their time to rise again. His efforts to merge Nirn with Coldharbour were still incomplete, but his knowledge of soul manipulation had grown stronger. His rivalry with Meridia intensified as her followers worked to destroy his influence wherever it took hold. Though Molag Bal did not fully achieve his goals in the First Era, his schemes were far from over. Now we move into the Second Era. The Second Era was one of Molag Bal's most active periods in Tamrielic history. Unlike the first era, when his influence was mostly indirect, the second era saw him launching a full-scale invasion of Nirn in an event known as the Plane Meld. This era also saw the rise of the Imperial Simulacrum, increased vampire activity, and conflicts between Molag Bal and other Daedric princes, particularly Meridia. His cults grew stronger, and for a brief period he came closer than ever to enslaving all of Nirn. The Plane Meld was Molag Bal's most ambitious attempt to merge Nirn with Coldharbour, effectively turning the mortal world into his own domain. The Plane Meld began when Manamarco, the King of Worms, a powerful necromancer and servant of Molag Bal, manipulated Emperor Varen Aquilarios into using the Amulet of Kings in an attempt to restore the Dragonfires, the ancient safeguard against Daedric incursions. Manamarco tricked Varen, leading to a catastrophic event known as the Soul Burst. This explosion shattered the veil between Nirn and Oblivion, allowing Molag Bal to begin pulling pieces of Nirn into Coldharbour. At the same time, Varen disappeared and the Empire was thrown into chaos, leading to the Interregnum, a period of no central rule over Cyrodiil. This event marked the beginning of the Plane Meld, a massive continent-wide crisis that saw dark anchors falling from the sky, vampires and Daedra pouring into Nirn, and countless mortal souls being dragged into Coldharbour. To bring Nirn into Coldharbour, Molag Bal deployed massive chains called Dark Anchors, which latched onto Tamriel and dragged parts of it into his realm. These Dark Anchors caused destruction across the land, tearing apart reality itself. Daedric forces, including Dremora, Zivkin, and massive Daedric titans, swarmed the land. Countless mortals were enslaved or transformed into soul-shriven, mindless husks who became eternal slaves in Coldharbour. Despite his initial success, Molag Bal's plan was ultimately thwarted by a mortal hero known as the Vestige, which is the protagonist, played by the player, in the Elder Scrolls Online. The Vestige, a soul-trapped warrior, led a rebellion against Molag Bal in Coldharbour, freeing many enslaved souls. They recovered the Amulet of Kings and used it to defeat Molag Bal's forces in Nirn. In a final battle within Coldharbour itself, the Vestige confronted and defeated Molag Bal, a nearly impossible feat, as Daedric princes are almost never truly destroyed. With Molag Bal's defeat, the Plane Meld collapsed and Nirn was saved from complete domination. However, many mortals remained trapped in Coldharbour, and Molag Bal's influence was far from gone. Despite his defeat in the Plane Meld, Molag Bal's other schemes continued, particularly his influence over vampires. His vampiric followers, including the Volkihar clan and other ancient bloodlines, continued to expand their power. Vampires became more organized, forming powerful covens and noble bloodlines across Tamriel. Some even secretly controlled mortal rulers, using their influence to manipulate politics and ensure Molag Bal's will persisted. During this time, Molag Bal was still worshipped in secret, and his cultists sought new ways to bring him back into Nirn. With the Plane Meld thwarted and the Second Era coming to a close, Molag Bal's influence weakened but never truly disappeared. His cults remained hidden, waiting for their time to rise again. Vampires continued to thrive, shaping the events of future centuries. His rivalry with Meridia only grew stronger as her forces actively sought to eradicate his influence from Tamriel. Though he suffered a major defeat in the Second Era, Molag Bal was far from finished. His schemes would continue into the Third and Fourth Eras, where his influence would once again shape the fate of Tamriel. Now we move into the Third Era. By the Third Era, Molag Bal's influence had become more insidious than his outright invasion attempts of the Second Era. Instead of another Plane Meld, he turned to manipulation, corruption, and vampirism, spreading his power through mortal pawns. This era saw his continued rivalry with Meridia, his presence in Cyrodiil's political intrigues, and his role in the mysterious warp in the West. His cults, vampires, and Daedric artifacts played key roles in the history of Tamriel, particularly in the events of the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall and the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. At the dawn of the Third Era, Tamriel was unified under Tiber Septim's empire, but Daedric influence remained strong in the shadows. Unlike Mehrunes Dagon, who was violently opposed to the Septim dynasty, Molag Bal took a more subtle approach, preferring to corrupt individual figures, spread his vampirism, and infiltrate power structures. His cultists gained influence in Cyrodiil, whispering into the ears of nobles and attempting to sway the course of the empire. Molag Bal's vampires, particularly the Cyrodiilic Order of the Virtuous Blood, became more organized and gained positions of power within the empire. Some legends even suggest that certain members of the Elder Council were secretly in service to Molag Bal, ensuring his long-term influence in imperial politics. One of the most mysterious events in Tamrielic history was the Warp in the West, and that was a moment in 3rd Era 417 when time itself was altered, causing multiple factions in the Iliac Bay to simultaneously win a war despite contradicting realities. Molag Bal was deeply involved in this event through his manipulation again of Mana Marco, the King of Worms. Mana Marco, an old ally of Molag Bal who we discussed previously, was granted immense power during this time, eventually ascending to become the God of Worms. Some scholars speculate that Molag Bal used the Warp in the West to weaken Arkay's influence, as Arkay is one of his greatest enemies due to his role as the god of life and death. Molag Bal's cults in the Iliac Bay benefited greatly from the confusion, expanding their reach in regions such as Orsinium, Wayrest, and Daggerfall. While the exact role Molag Bal played remains uncertain, what is clear is that after the Warp in the West, his influence had grown significantly. By the time of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, Molag Bal was still a major player in Tamriel's affairs, despite the rise of Mehrunes Dagon's Oblivion crisis. While Dagon attempted to destroy the world, Molag Bal remained focused on corruption, enslavement, and maintaining his vampiric bloodlines. In the game Oblivion, Molag Bal gives a Daedric quest to the player, demonstrating his cruel and manipulative nature. He commands the player to corrupt and murder a noble warrior, a man named Melis Petilius, who had renounced violence and lived in seclusion. The player is tasked with tricking Melis into breaking his vow of pacifism, forcing him to pick up a cursed mace and kill them in battle. If successful, Molag Bal rewards the player with the Mace of Molag Bal, a powerful weapon that drains the stamina and magicka of its victims. This quest reflects Molag Bal's true nature, not just as a warlord or a brute force like Dagon, but as a manipulator who enjoys breaking the will of mortals. During the Oblivion crisis, Molag Bal did not directly intervene, but his cultists and vampires took full advantage of the chaos. Many vampiric bloodlines flourished, taking advantage of the war-torn empire to spread their curse. Some scholars believe that Molag Bal secretly aided Mana Marco, who by this time had returned to Tamriel and was attempting to spread necromantic rule. The destruction of the Septim dynasty left a power vacuum that Molag Bal's followers sought to exploit, ensuring that chaos and suffering would continue. As the Third Era came to an end, Molag Bal had firmly cemented his place in Tamriel's history. He had orchestrated the corruption of warriors, politicians, and even gods like Mana Marco. His vampires had thrived and become some of the most powerful factions in Tamriel, and he had played a role in the two major historical events, the Warp in the West and the Oblivion Crisis, both of which reshaped the continent of Tamriel. However, with the fall of the Septim Empire and the dawn of the Fourth Era, Molag Bal set his sights on new conquests. His influence would continue to spread, culminating in the Fourth Era's events in Skyrim and the rise of the Volkihar clan. And we will now move into the Fourth Era. The Fourth Era saw Molag Bal's influence reach new heights. With the Septim dynasty destroyed, the empire weakened, and the world slipping into chaos, the Daedric Prince of Domination took full advantage of this era's instability. Molag Bal's most significant presence in this period came through the Volkihar clan of vampires, who spread his influence across Skyrim, his artifact, the Mace of Molag Bal, which played a key role in events that happened in Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and the continued expansion of vampirism, particularly with the rise of the Dawnguard conflict. One of Molag Bal's most loyal and powerful mortal factions in the Fourth Era was the Volkihar clan, an ancient vampire bloodline led by Lord Harkon. The Volkihar were direct servants of Molag Bal, tracing their origins to the first vampires, who were created when Molag Bal violated a Nedic woman in an unholy ritual. Lord Harkon, known as the leader of the Volkihar, sought to fulfill a prophecy known as the Tyranny of the Sun, which would blot out the sun and allow vampires to rule Tamriel unchallenged. Harkon believed that this was Molag Bal's will, and he devoted centuries to achieving this goal. However, Harkon's ambition was ultimately his downfall. The last Dragonborn, or the player character in Skyrim, would either side with the Dawnguard or the vampires, and regardless would go on to defeat Harkon and shatter his prophecy. Like in previous eras, Molag Bal continued his tradition of testing mortals' willpower, offering his Daedric artifact to those willing to commit cruelty in his name. In the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the Dragonborn encounters Molag Bal's shrine in Markarth, where the Daedric Prince speaks to them through a crumbling, abandoned house. Molag Bal commands the Dragonborn to torture and kill a priest of Boethia, which is another rival Daedric prince. The priest, Logrolf the Willful, refuses to submit, forcing the Dragonborn to break him with the mace of Molag Bal. Once the priest is utterly dominated, Molag Bal rewards the player with the powerful mace, a weapon that drains the soul and weakens enemies. This quest once again highlights Molag Bal's true nature. He's not just a warlord, but a manipulator who delights in breaking the spirit of his victims. The spread of vampirism led to a powerful enemy, the Dawnguard, an ancient order of vampire hunters. The Dawnguard was revived by a warrior named Isran, who saw the threat of Molag Bal's vampires growing too strong. The group's sole purpose was to eradicate vampires and stop the influences of Molag Bal from spreading further. This led to an all-out war between the Volkihar clan and the Dawnguard, with the last Dragonborn playing a decisive role in this conflict. While the Dawnguard conflict and the Volkihar vampires were the most notable events tied to Molag Bal, his influence could be felt in other ways throughout the Fourth Era. The continued instability of the Empire left many rulers desperate for power, and some turned to Daedric princes like Molag Bal in search of strength. His cultists remained active, particularly in places of political weakness, whispering their master's will into the ears of corrupt nobles and warlords. In the chaotic state of Tamriel, with war between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, it gave Molag Bal more opportunities to manipulate and corrupt mortals. During the Fourth Era, Molag Bal has succeeded in spreading his influence more than ever before. His vampirism is far more widespread than any of the previous eras, despite the fall of Lord Harkon. His Daedric artifacts continue to corrupt new champions, ensuring that his presence would never fade. His cultists remain deeply entrenched in Tamriel society, waiting for new opportunities to expand his reach. While the Fourth Era saw temporary setbacks, such as the failure of the Tyranny of the Sun prophecy, Molag Bal's true strength lies in his patience. Unlike other Daedric princes who seek immediate conquest, Molag Bal understands that domination is a slow process, and his influence will only continue to grow in future eras. In conclusion, Molag Bal's history is a testament to his enduring nature as one of the most menacing, manipulative, and evil of the Daedric princes. From his creation of vampires to his pervasive influence over mortals, Molag Bal has consistently sought to dominate and break the will of those who cross his path, shaping the world in ways both subtle and catastrophic. His impact on the people of Tamriel, from the rise of the Volkihar clan to his manipulation of champions, reveals his true nature as a prince of tyranny and control. While his reach has ebbed and flowed throughout the ages, his influence on the mortal realm is far from over. Looking forward to The Elder Scrolls VI, it's clear that Molag Bal will continue to play a significant role in the overarching narrative of Tamriel, just like the rest of the Daedric princes. With the current trajectory of the Elder Scrolls universe, we may see Molag Bal emerge as a key antagonist once again. Perhaps we'll even see new ways his vampires or cultists will play a role in the narrative, expanding upon his already terrifying legacy. Molag Bal's story is one of unrelenting ambition and tactical patience, and as Bethesda continues to unfold new chapters in Tamriel, it's likely that the Prince of Domination will always find new ways to manipulate the world for his own ends. As the events of The Elder Scrolls VI begin to shape up, we can only guess what dark machinations Molag Bal has planned for the future of Tamriel, and whether our new hero will rise to face him or join him once more. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more in-depth lore and speculation about the Elder Scrolls universe, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content. I will see you guys in the next one.